Hi, I'm Michelle Boxall, founder of the Blood and Cells Advocacy roster, BCAR. So I'm here with Diana from Anthony Nolan. BCAR's been having lots of discussions around the blood centre, and I've been looking for some alternative perspectives from Europe. We're going to start off looking at setting the scene. In the US, community blood centres are described as supplying nearly 60% of the national blood supply and are increasingly recognised as critical infrastructure for cell and gene therapies. How does the blood system work in the UK? And would the term blood centre even resonate with how your organisation describes itself?
Thanks, Michelle. So in the UK, blood supply is all done through NHS BT, so NHS Blood and Transplant, and is slightly separate from stem cell provision, which is done through the aligned registry, which we manage. We Anthony Nolan manage. We coordinate the supply of stem cells for both transplant and for cell and gene therapies through their line register, which means that we have both the donors that come directly to Anthony Nolan and those that are part of NHSBT.
Okay. So then looking at infrastructure, particularly related to advanced therapies, the conversation in the US has been centred on blood centres already having 70 to 80% of the infrastructure needed for cell and gene therapy workflows, from collection, processing, storage, logistics, compliance. When you look at your own organisation, so Anthony Nolan, how much of that story resonates and where do the gaps or differences lie?
So in the UK, maybe it's a little bit more less fragmented in some respects because NHS is one NHS and is most of the cell provision, at least for autologous therapies, is all carried out via the NHS. We have our own. They have collection centres throughout various hospitals in the UK. NHSBT have also their own centres, and us, Anthony Nolan, have another cell collection centre that we opened recently in Nottingham, where we also collect apheresis material. In terms of sort of further downstream processing of these cells, there are both NHSBT and ourselves. We provide also cryopreservation services for some autologous therapies. And NHSBT also provide certain manufacturing, if you like, for cell therapies. So the infrastructure kind of exists. It's probably not maybe as large as it is in the US, I would say, but it's dealt with slightly different from the blood service per se. I would say it's a little bit more separate. We also have a smaller country, so I think that also means that having just a few centers will probably cover the majority of the of at least the geography, if not the population.
Yeah. Did you want to speak a little bit about the centre that you've just opened up? Because obviously that kind of speaks to you saw a need, which you think that were there bottlenecks and reasons why you opened up your own
Yeah.
facility?
So one of the things, obviously, we coordinate, as I said, the stem cell provision for transplants within the UK and also for donors that are recruited here, but cells are sent abroad. And one of the things we're finding that was extremely frustrating was that the apheresis capacity in the UK is generally not sufficient for the supply that is required. Um, because most apheresis units are used for various purposes, not just stem cell collection, um, and not just apheresis of cells. They're used for platelets and other sort of, and mainly for autologous therapies, which are within the hospital. So they are for patients mainly. So when you are looking at trying to find slots for healthy donors for transplant, it becomes even more difficult. So with the increased frustration not being able to find the slots that were needed, we open our own center. It's been running say properly, for a few months now. We're very excited about it. It's in Nottingham, in one of the hospitals in Nottingham. We felt that it was better to have it within a hospital so that people felt safer, that it wasn't, if there was any adverse events, they would be contained easily. There will be medical assistance quite quickly. So far, we haven't used it to capacity yet because we're still finding our feet, making sure that all the processes are working well, that we are able to manage all the logistics. But I think we're very excited that as soon as we are able to operate to capacity, that will probably at least ease the burden to the NHS in at least provision of healthy material.
Okay. And when you say ease the burden, is that for the need for cell and gene therapy industry, or is it more
I think for everything.
for everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we provide healthy donor material for both transplant and cell and gene therapy research and development. So that allows us to be a little bit more kind of flexible, if you like. Currently, we don't collect from patients, but we're hoping that we will be able to do that soon as well.
And then looking at the regulatory landscape, in the US, blood centres operate under FDA oversight, which has shaped how they've built compliance-ready infrastructure that pharma increasingly values. In Europe, you're navigating EMA frameworks, national regulators, and in the UK, a post-Brexit regulatory environment. How does that regulatory context shape what you can offer to advanced therapy developers? And is it a barrier or an advantage, or simply it's a different conversation than we're having in the US?
Well, in the UK, we operate the blood supply, if you like, and the cell supply operates under HTA, which is the Human Tissue Authority. The Human Tissue Authority have been around for much longer than almost other legislations elsewhere. I think it provides a very nice framework for understanding how to collect material ethically and, if you like, properly. It does, unfortunately, advanced therapies are really governed, or all therapies are governed by the MHRA, which is the Medicines Agency. And unfortunately, it's kind of like a little gap, I would say, in the in-between. There are occasions when it's difficult to know under which legislation you should lie. The HTA, for example, says if a cell has been in culture, it no longer falls under their remit. And the MHRA say, well, if it's not for human use, it's not in our jurisdiction either.
Right.
So there are sort of, if you like, gray areas. And I think...
And do they speak to each other?
I think they do.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the people,
Or
they
collaborate.
know each other.
Yeah.
And there are occasions when, there is a need to have them both on the table to understand how to navigate new things. I think one of the things is that we're operating on innovation, and nobody knows what's going to happen next, least of all,
Yeah.
the poor regulators that are having to, make up new things as they go along. So I think, there's an element of they definitely collaborate, but sometimes they just, they're overworked and underpaid, I guess, if you like. And it is very difficult sometimes to know what's best to do next. Occasionally, we have been frustrated in that it's very difficult to make them make a commitment about saying, yes, this can be done this way or that way. But, we're kind of working towards something. I think EU now will have a new regulation in place, the SOHO regulation, which is specifically centered around blood provision and cell provision, and ensuring that all the centers that are collecting cells and collecting human material, are done under very strict regulations, much more so, I guess, than it was before. I think importantly, they're trying to protect donors. That was the newest, the best new part of that regulation is around protecting donors that didn't exist before. Small sort of caveat to that is that it doesn't include research use. Here, research use does fall under HTA, but we also have the REC system, which is, ethical review boards that will, if you like, fill that gap to ensure that things are done in an ethical way.
Right. I was interested to see whether if is the FDA leading the way? Are things happening there before they happen here, or is there complete misalignment? We just do our own thing, and we don't necessarily worry what's
No, I
going
think
on.
everybody worries, and I think, especially because I think most of these therapies are global. you most of what we're working on, you need to be able to sell it everywhere.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not going to work. Or at
Cool.
least in what we call everywhere, the Western world, the bit that we kind of look around. I think the FDA, up until recently, I would say, have been probably a little bit more proactive. They have more people, more money, and also probably more activity, if you like, to
Right, yes,
kind
because
of
it's such a
do
huge...
new things, and more things are put forward to them to say, what do we do about this? We tend to probably wait to see more. Maybe we're a bit more cautious. The other thing is, before we left the EU, we were under one one regulator, the EMA, and they were based here in the UK. And when they moved, all their personnel moved with them. So we were left with only a skeleton staff. Obviously, the MHRA are trying to rebuild the expertise, but that takes some time. So yeah, we're trying to align, and I think there's been also alliances between us and the Canadian and the Swiss authorities to try and come up with things that work for various people. But it takes time, and jurisdictions will always think, well, I can't do this because it's that rule that stops me all. So
In terms of the BCAR conversation, the consortium group BCAR was formed because patient access to advanced therapies depends on the blood industry making its voice heard. From your vantage point in the UK, what's the single most important thing that pharma and biotech companies don't yet understand about what the blood industry contributes, and what could change if they did?
yeah, I mean, one of the frustrations for me was the reinvention of the wheel every time they want to do something. I felt it very acutely moving from biotech to Anthony Nolan a few years back, where when I started working there, I was thinking, they have all this sorted out. They have the logistics here. They have, all this infrastructure already in place. Why didn't we know that this existed? Or why didn't we look at it and say, actually, I'm going to take advantage of that instead of having to do it all myself?
Yes.
Um,
So do you think it's just about awareness, or
I
you
think
think it's...
there's an element of awareness, maybe a little bit of arrogance, if you like, that, you think, oh, I know how to do this better. Especially one of the things I often show in my talks is that the journey of a transplant is almost identical to that, for both patients and the cells, to what the journey of a stem cell therapy looks like. So we have been doing this for 50 years. Please learn from the mistakes, and look at the kind of infrastructure that is already in place. I mean, we have, for example, in our registry, nearly 1 million donors, and this is just the UK donors. The US has many more through the WMDA, which kind of governs all of the registries. There are, millions of potential donors. So take advantage of that. They also have all the correct infrastructure to do this in an ethical way, with all the legal and governance necessary to ensure that there's no surprises of the nasty kind.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much. Those insights have been really useful to me. Thinking there's many there's many differences but many similarities, and certainly that need to raise awareness amongst the advanced therapies sector is the same as it is in the US. So that's been... hopefully we can have more conversations on this side of the pond.
I hope so too. Thanks. Thank you.